This man is a ruthless criminal who terrorized Mexico, earning the infamous nickname El Mochaorejas, the ear chopper. Today, you'll find out how Daniel Arizmendi built a criminal empire, kidnapped the wealthy, and left a trail of fear by cutting off his victims' ears. What drove him to such brutal tactics, and how did the authorities finally bring him to justice? Stay with us as we uncover the chilling details of one of Mexico's most notorious criminals. Daniel Arizmendi López was born on July 22, 1958, in Miacatlan, Morelos. He was the son of Catarino Arizmendi and Maria López and had three brothers, Juan, Ubaldo, and Aurelio. In 1967, the family moved to Mexico City, settling in the San Juan Pantitlán neighborhood within the Iztapalapa delegation. Their father, a possessive and jealous alcoholic, frequently vented his anger by beating his wife and children. Daniel, the second oldest, was often severely punished by both parents. He was a quiet, reserved child who enjoyed school, though he had to repeat the 5th year of elementary school. His most noticeable physical feature was his large ears. When Daniel was about 8 years old, his parents separated, and he and his siblings initially stayed with their mother. However, after some time, their mother returned to live with Catarino, leaving Daniel and his siblings behind. They eventually moved back in with their father. By this point, Daniel had developed deep resentment toward his mother for abandoning them. They then relocated to Cuautla, where Daniel began high school but left after the first year, choosing to work at his father's workshop, which produced scarves, hats, and baby sweaters. He worked part-time and earned less than minimum wage, spending his free time playing soccer until he turned 20. It was around this time he met Maria de Lourdes Arias, his future wife. They married on August 27, 1977, and had 2 children. Despite being married, Daniel was distant and cold toward his wife and children, rarely showing affection. After leaving the workshop, he took a job in a garter factory, earning 80 pesos a week. Stressed by the work, he turned to alcohol and became increasingly irresponsible. Later, he briefly worked for the Secretary of the Navy, counting cartridges and performing other menial tasks before quitting. After that, he spent 3 months as a street sweeper before finding work as a private driver for a construction contractor, where he stayed for 4 years. During this time, his wife began working as a nurse for Social Security. Together, they saved enough to buy a used Combi, which they converted into a public transport vehicle on the route from the airport to Texcoco subway. They had plans to sell it and buy land, but ultimately, they didn't follow through. Over time, Daniel's behavior mirrored his father's. He became consumed with jealousy over his wife's career, feeling inadequate. He would frequently show up at the hospital where she worked, imagining he would catch her cheating. His jealousy and suspicion fueled violent outbursts directed at his wife and children. Often, his family questioned whether he truly cared about them, as he barely spoke to them. Eventually, he demanded that his wife quit her job, forbidding her from working. At 26, Daniel joined the Morelos Judicial Police through a family connection, but lasted only 2 months due to a staff change. However, during his short time on the force, he met someone skilled in stealing cars with just a screwdriver and pliers. After leaving the police force, Daniel began learning how to open and start cars without keys, launching his criminal career. He started targeting the Plaza Aragon shopping malls, where he would steal cars and remove their engines to sell. He managed to steal up to 150 vehicles and received help from his brother Aurelio, who worked as a car theft investigator. The idea to steal cars came when a driver asked if they could get him an American car without the proper legal documents. From there, Daniel and Aurelio came up with the idea to alter vehicle serial numbers. Aurelio, who had once worked in a small stainless steel kitchen factory, suggested using a metal punch technique to remark serial numbers, which they would then paint over to conceal the alterations. Within 6 months, Daniel and Aurelio formed a gang consisting of 15 members, each assigned specific tasks. Some stole cars, others rebranded them, and the rest handled the sales. Daniel and his brother Aurelio led the operation, making up to 90,000 pesos per month. In 1990, Daniel was arrested and sent to Barrientos prison in Tlalnepantla, where he stayed for only a few months. However, his brief imprisonment and the financial strain weighed heavily on him. Once released, he returned to stealing cars and took on a hobby, modifying a red convertible to make it faster, driven by his love for speed, and spent hours on the project. Aurelio was released 2 years later, thanks to help from Joaquin Barajas Zuniga, correcting the previous name, and the two resumed their criminal operations. This time, they had the backing of police, as they knew people in various government agencies, including the PGR and even the Chamber of Deputies, to whom they occasionally sold cars. During a family visit, their niece casually mentioned that someone in Cuernavaca, Morelos, had been kidnapped, and the family had paid 1 million pesos for the person's release. It was then that Daniel realized how easy it might be to make money through kidnapping. Something shifted in Daniel's thinking, and he started contemplating easier ways to make money. Days later, he gathered his gang and explained that car theft was no longer as profitable as before, especially considering how much they had to pay in bribes and bail after their arrests. He suggested kidnapping people for ransom as a quicker, more lucrative path. On June 11th, 1995, Daniel committed his first kidnapping. The victim was Martin Gomez, a gas station owner. They ambushed him by blocking his path with their car, followed by a brown Avant. Martin was taken along the Mexico-Puebla highway to their secret workshop, where they repainted and rebranded stolen vehicles. Once there, they blindfolded him, tied his hands and feet, and locked him in the bathroom. They initially demanded 1 million pesos, but settled on a ransom of 350,000 pesos, which was dropped off in a soapbox at the gas station owned by Gomez. Hours later, they collected the money and released Martin, leaving him on a sidewalk. On December 7th, 1995, Eduardo Pineda, the owner of warehouses in Toluca, was kidnapped. He was taken to a property in Valle de Chalco, where he was held for 2 months because his family refused to pay the ransom. During this time, Daniel decided to make a shocking move that would soon become his signature method. He ordered 2 of his men to hold Pineda down. One pinned his chest, while the other restrained his legs and head. Then, Daniel grabbed a pair of 30-centimeter scissors, typically used for cutting chicken, and severed Eduardo's ear. Beforehand, he had prepared ashes from a burned rag to cauterize the wound, a technique he had learned from his uncle, who had once treated a similar injury using ashes. Daniel called Eduardo's wife and instructed her to go to a gas station near her home, where she would find a plastic bag hidden in a planter. Inside, she found a note and her husband's severed ear. They eventually arranged for the ransom money to be dropped off at the Eduardo Molina Sports Center. However, the person sent to pick up the money was arrested, and the cash was confiscated. When Daniel later called to ask about the money, Eduardo's wife insisted she had already made the payment and pleaded for her husband's release. Upon realizing that the money had been lost, Daniel decided to kill Eduardo. They wrapped his body in a blanket and dumped it on a road in Chalco. Afterwards, Daniel called Eduardo's wife, telling her that her husband had been released and she could pick him up. Hours later, his body was found. Following this kidnapping, Daniel and his gang were able to amass a significant amount of money, which allowed him to buy a discotheque in Ciudad Nezahualcóyotl, where he frequently drank until dawn. As time went on, he developed a drug addiction. By this point, Daniel had built a well-organized criminal enterprise. Each member had a specific role, and Daniel himself was involved in every aspect: kidnapping, guarding the victims, negotiating ransoms, and personally cutting off his victims' ears. Daniel not only managed the release of his victims, but also ensured the money was divided among his group. He was responsible for laundering the ransom, procuring weapons, vehicles, and safe houses. Everything was meticulously organized, and he had even befriended judicial officers who provided protection. His criminal empire had grown to such an extent that he could obtain nearly anything he desired. In 1996, Daniel orchestrated the kidnapping of Carlos Alonso Hernandez, the son of a gas station owner. Carlos was taken to a second house in Valle de Chalco, where he was held in a small enclosed room with only a metal door through which food was passed. He remained there for 7 days. His captors then claimed the house was under police surveillance, forcing them to flee and leaving him behind. Days later, Daniel and an accomplice personally retrieved Carlos and took him to Daniel's discotheque, which had been shut down due to financial issues. Carlos's family was reluctant to pay the ransom, prompting Daniel to resort to his infamous method. He severed Carlos's ear and sent it to his brother in a Gerber jar. 2 days later, the police conducted a raid, arresting 3 of the men guarding Carlos. Thankfully, Carlos was still alive and was rescued. Daniel attempted to bribe the police to release the detainees, but his efforts failed. He then enlisted the help of a former policeman working with his group to try to free the captives and keep himself and his wife, now involved in the criminal enterprise, from being implicated. By this time, Daniel's entire family, including his wife, children, and brothers-in-law, had joined the operation. Daniel negotiated with the subdirector of the police, offering him 150,000 pesos to avoid being implicated. The money was delivered to Daniel's mother-in-law's house, and the patrol cars watching Daniel's house withdrew. However, the victim's family continued their own investigation and reported the case to the Mexico City District Attorney's Office. Their investigation eventually led to Martin Fuentes Marquez, a used car salesman known as El Gato, who provided key information on Daniel's whereabouts, revealing that he was heading to Veracruz. The commander, along with judicial officers, tracked him to that location, where they found Daniel with two other individuals. Daniel immediately tried to negotiate his freedom by offering 250,000 pesos, a Dodge van, and a wine-colored spirit. Following this, the district attorney's office obtained phone numbers related to the case and requested technical support from the PGR to trace them. Through wiretaps, the federal government finally became aware of Daniel Arizmendi's identity. Up until that point, Daniel had been operating under the radar, thanks to his well-established protection network. That same year, Daniel carried out his 11th kidnapping, targeting Alejandra, a young woman of Spanish descent and the daughter of the owners of the Anís del Mico company. Alejandra was tailed for 20 days, but the first kidnapping attempt failed when she realized she was being followed and managed to escape. 2 months later, they successfully intercepted her on 100 Metros Avenue and took her to a house in San Juan de Aragon. There, she was chained and left with only a sheet for cover. Daniel's gang demanded a ransom of 10 million pesos, but after lengthy negotiations, they agreed to accept 4 million, which had to be delivered wrapped in pillowcases. The exchange was arranged to take place near a pedestrian bridge on the outskirts of Puebla. Daniel and his accomplice arrived in a Grand Cherokee pickup truck with 2 pillowcases tied with curtain cords and placed them near the pedestrian bridge. As they attempted to retrieve the money, 2 armed men emerged and opened fire. Daniel and his companion returned fire, but in the chaos, they lost the money. Enraged, Daniel returned to the house where Alejandra was being held, and despite Aurelio's pleas not to, Daniel ordered 2 accomplices to restrain her. He then took a pair of scissors and cut off both of her ears. He contacted Alejandra's parents, informing them that he had left something for them at a booth on 100 Metros Avenue. This time, he demanded 8 million pesos for her release. When the family arrived at the booth, they found the gruesome discovery of their daughter's ears. The next day, the family agreed to pay the ransom. Alejandra was released, but her health was in critical condition. Although she was rushed to a surgeon, her ears could not be reattached. Since more than 54 hours had passed, doctors attempted to reconstruct Alejandra's ears using grafts. On April 1st, 1997, another victim, Luis Manuel Gascon, a grocery store owner, was kidnapped by Daniel Arizmendi. Like the previous victims, Luis was placed in a van and blindfolded before being taken to one of Daniel's hideouts. Once there, a chain was wrapped around his neck and locked with a padlock. The space was only 1.5 meters long by 1 meter wide. After several hours, Daniel's group contacted a relative of Luis, instructing them to remain calm. They then tied his hands and feet, gagged him with tape, and Daniel proceeded to cut off his left ear. They left penicillin in a box nearby and untied his hands. Days later, Luis was released after the ransom was paid. A month later, they abducted Raul Navaricano, whose father was a prominent banana exporter and owner of several warehouses. Raul was taken to the house in San Juan de Aragon, where he was chained up. This time, the kidnappers demanded 3 million pesos. Raul's father immediately alerted the authorities, who informed him that they were already familiar with the kidnapper, Daniel Arizmendi. The authorities placed devices to record the phone conversations. During one call, Daniel stated his demand for 3 million pesos, even though he was aware that the police were involved, and they agreed on a 30-day deadline to gather the money. Throughout the month, the Attorney General's office and investigative agents monitored the calls. Raul's father managed to raise only 967,000 pesos, which he communicated to the captors, but Daniel refused to accept it. Days later, Raul's family received an ominous message: his severed ear. As the 11-day deadline approached, Raul's father reported that he had managed to gather 1.5 million pesos, but once again, Daniel rejected the offer. Shortly after, Raul was killed. His body was wrapped in a mattress and dumped in the Santa Marta neighborhood near Mexico City's penitentiary. Daniel's disregard for the authorities was evident as they continued their pursuit. On May 15th, Raul's body was found and remained unclaimed in the Semafo for a month before his parents finally identified and recovered it. In October 1997, Daniel kidnapped Avelino Ruiz Noriega, a businessman who owned the wine and grocery store La Europea. This time, they demanded a staggering $10 million in ransom. Daniel followed his typical modus operandi and sent Avelino's ear to his son, packaging it in a cereal box and leaving it in a locker at a commercial store. After receiving the ransom, they released Avelino near a church. In December 1997, Daniel's criminal activities took a violent turn within his own group. He killed Jose Trinidad Hernandez, Gerardo Rafael Martinez, and Bartolome Francos, also known as El Chino, because he suspected they were planning to betray him to the authorities. Their bodies were wrapped in blankets and abandoned near the Valle de Aragon housing unit in Ciudad Neza. At this point, the situation had spiraled out of control, and despite Mexican authorities' efforts, Daniel Arizmendi remained at large. In 1998, the PGR created a sketch of Arizmendi, which was quickly distributed nationwide, making his alias El Mochaorejas, a name feared throughout Mexico. The breakthrough in capturing Arizmendi came with the arrest of Daniel Venegas, one of his associates. Venegas provided crucial information that led the police to Cuernavaca, where Daniel and his brothers were hiding in hotels in Cuernavaca and Cuautla. The federal judicial police traced phone, cellular, and pager numbers to Cuernavaca. The phone company confirmed that one of the lines was located at 12 Ontario Street in the Belo Horizonte subdivision. On May 22, 1998, the police began surveillance of the house and observed Daniel's son leaving in an unmarked car. After a chase, he lost control and crashed. Upon arrest, he confessed that the house where his father was staying was open. When the authorities prepared to enter the house, they announced their presence and asked for everyone to exit without resistance. A voice replied, stating that only 3 women and a child were inside. Upon entering, the police discovered that Daniel had left in a red pickup truck, but they found 50 million pesos stashed inside the house. In addition to the gold centenarios, Maria de Lourdes Arias, Daniel's wife, and Peronin Cajaravilla, who were not part of Arizmendi's group, were detained inside the house along with their daughter and young grandson. Later, the police contacted Daniel, informing him that his family had been arrested and urging him to surrender. Daniel told them he would call back, but never did. However, the story didn't end there. Thanks to his family's capture, many more important details came to light. It was revealed that Arizmendi's family never used his real name, and they had obtained false birth certificates through government offices, making them appear legal. With these documents, they were able to process a wide range of identification papers under different identities. Additionally, lawyers and judicial agents were implicated in their operations. As a result, 18 houses and a significant amount of money were seized. On July 30th, 1998, Aurelio Arizmendi was with some construction workers when they informed him that his car was surrounded by the police. He asked one of the workers for the keys to their car in an attempt to flee, but during his escape, he collided with a cab and a minibus. While trying to get away, the police intercepted him and shot him in both legs. By August of the same year, Daniel Arizmendi was left alone. His plan was to recover the confiscated money and retire. He thought about becoming a real estate agent outside of Mexico City and even considered moving to Querétaro to live with one of his mistresses, Dulce Paz, and the son he had with her. But despite these thoughts of leaving his criminal life behind, Daniel continued with his activities. This time, his target was Raul Nieto del Rio, a businessman from Querétaro. Daniel and his accomplices rented a house in Querétaro and carefully studied Raul's daily routes. Daniel instructed his gang on how to proceed, but their first 2 attempts to kidnap Raul failed as he changed his route and managed to escape. A few days later, they intercepted him again on an avenue in Querétaro. They blocked his vehicle, and when Raul tried to reverse, he collided with Daniel's car, which was waiting behind him. One of the kidnappers got out and fired, hitting Raul in the head. They quickly placed him in their van and took him to a house in the Santa Barbara neighborhood. Upon arrival, they realized Raul was in critical condition and had no pulse. They decided to cut off his ears and dispose of the body, burying it in a room where they had previously dug a hole to store a cooler with money. Daniel then ordered 2 of his accomplices to cover the hole with a cement floor. Afterward, they contacted Raul's family, demanding $15 million for his release. When the family expressed willingness to pay but asked for proof of life, Daniel sent a message hidden in a bag of popcorn, which was left at the box office of the Querétaro bull ring. Inside the bag were Raul's watch and 2 ears. That night, The family agreed to pay $9 million, requesting a month to gather the money. However, they demanded further proof that Raul was still alive. In response, Daniel and his accomplices removed the cement floor, retrieved the body, and cleaned it. They applied facial powder to his face, covered him with gauze and tape, blindfolded him, and wrapped his body up to the chest with a sheet. Beside him, they placed a newspaper dated that day and took several photographs. They then sent an envelope with some of these photos to Raul's family as proof of life, along with a demand for $100,000 as a warning that they would bury him if the terms weren't met. On August 17, 1998, the police raided Daniel Arizmendi's house in Querétaro, where his mistress, Dulce Paz, was staying. Inside, they discovered a cooler containing 8 million pesos. By that time, Daniel Arizmendi's phones were tapped, and the police were already aware of Raul Nieto's death. They decided to set a trap to capture him. The authorities knew that Daniel had an appointment with 2 of his accomplices to pick up a fake voter's ID on Rio Churubusco Avenue near the Palacio de los Deportes in Mexico City. It was 7 o'clock in the evening when Daniel was about to retrieve the credential. He was near the municipality of Naucalpan when he was intercepted by several men who forced him into a van and blindfolded him. They drove him to an undisclosed location where he realized he was inside a warehouse. There, the judicial police were waiting to interrogate him. They had finally caught the ruthless criminal known as El Mochaorejas. During the interrogation, the police informed Daniel that his lover, Dulce Paz, had been arrested along with his other accomplices and that they knew about the murder of Raul Nieto. They took Daniel back to Querétaro, where he was forced to show them the location where he had buried the businessman's body. Daniel Arizmendi's reign of terror had come to an end. During his interview, Daniel expressed no remorse for his actions. He coldly stated that he felt no guilt for the harm he had inflicted and, if given the chance, would do it all again, as it was something he was passionate about. This chilling case left a permanent mark on Mexico's criminal history, with Daniel Arizmendi being considered one of the most notorious criminals the country has ever seen.